Good evening all, and welcome. Hotels are often necessary to stay at while you're going away, and there are your fair share of creepy things that can happen while being there. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I worked at this hotel, and unexplainable stuff kept happening. There's one room in particular that has more activity than any others, and anyone who has worked there for longer than 2 months has a story to share about it. For some context, this room is not your typical hotel room. It's set up almost like an apartment. When you walk through the door, there's a common area where you can watch TV and have a meal, or enjoy the minibar complete with glassware. There are 2 bedrooms in this room, and they are separate from the common area. To start, the first story I'm going to tell you about happened to me. I was in the room cleaning by myself, in the 1 bedroom, when I hear the door to the room open up. I thought that the people staying in the room may have come back earlier than expected, so I called out from the bedroom apologizing about not having the room clean. However, I don't hear any response back, so I call out to them again and don't hear a response back. So I go out into the common area to see if someone was there. Then I looked into the other bedroom to see if they were there for some reason, but the room was empty. I was confused at this and finished cleaning the room before going to talk to my co-worker to see if he saw anyone come up to the room. When I asked him if he saw anyone go up to the room, he said he didn't. I asked if he was sure because I heard that door open with the card key click, and he said he didn't see anyone go up there in the room besides me. The next story is about the same room, but it happened to a co-worker. What he told me is that one night he was delivering drinks to another room, but the guy's a klutz, and ended up dropping the tray, shattering the glasses. Within 5 seconds of the glass breaking, he heard footsteps coming from the room, and then the door opened and closed. He thought it was just a guest, seeing where the noise had come from, and would explain the door opening and closing, so he brushed it off. After he got the broken glass all cleaned up, he made new drinks and delivered them, and then told my co-worker what happened. He joked that he must have woken up the people in the nearby room because he heard the door open and then close. The co-worker just looked at them confused and asked which room it was that he heard the door open. So he told them the room. Apparently there was no one staying in that room for the night, and both of them were worried that someone may have gotten in somehow. So they both went to the room to investigate, and when they went in, they found that no one was in there, but all the glassware in the cabinets was completely destroyed. To this day, I refuse to go into the room by myself unless strictly necessary, because it always sends a chill down my spine and has a weird vibe. The next story takes place in a different room of the hotel, and after the events of the first, just for context. On this particular day, we only had 2 people check in, and since the hotel is small, this occurrence happens every so often. As a result, I had to do a few extra tasks around the hotel, one of which is going into the empty rooms and turning off all the lights because people will leave the lights on more often than you'd think. So I went into every room and made sure all the lights were turned off, and went on to finish the rest of my tasks for the evening, because I could clock out, which is around 11 PM, but because it was a slow night I was able to finish my tasks 2 hours early. Normally I will be allowed to clock out early, but the person running the shift that night was a stickler about clocking out early. So she made me double check all the rooms to make sure the lights were out before she'd consider letting me clock out early. I checked every room, and as I expected, all the lights were turned off, except for this one that had all the lights on. I was shocked when I walked in, because I knew for a fact I had been in every room and turned all the lights off. So the fact that it was turned on freaked me out. But as I was walking out, a light by the bed suddenly switched on. I was now creeped out. I hadn't heard of people seeing lights coming on in their room, so I knew something was up and just left that room. The next story happens earlier this year and is one that still creeps me out to this day. I was finishing cleaning this one room and was going back to our supply room to grab stuff to clean it. As I was walking back to the room, I looked down the hall and saw a woman in a white robe and brown hair walk towards her room. I go in the room to check and see which room I have to clean next, and it just so happened that it was a room down the same hallway the woman was walking. I was mad because what this meant is the woman came back to her room earlier than expected, so I would have to go to her room and ask when I could clean her room. Now this may seem odd because it's a boutique hotel, but we try to be more personal and give that extra interaction with guests. I go to the room and knock on the door, expecting her to reply, but after 30 seconds didn't get a response. I waited for 2 minutes before I used my card key to enter in case something had happened to her, and as I opened the door slightly to call out her name to make sure it was okay to proceed, I don't get a reply. I then enter the room cautiously and look around to find no one. I immediately start to panic because I knew for a fact I saw someone walk this way to the end of the hall and that there were no other rooms she could have gotten into, and I just ran out the room and closed the door. I got to the front desk to speak to my coworker about what I saw, and he didn't seem fazed. Although he hadn't seen her himself, he says there are other people that have seen the Phantom Lady. The following story happened in the basement of the hotel, which alone looks very creepy and gives you a very unwelcoming vibe. The basement is the heart of the hotel though, because it's how we're able to transport items without any guests seeing, storing stuff as needed, and also has some offices. Employees have always just reported feeling uneasy walking through the halls, especially at night, because sometimes it feels like you're being watched. This incident happened on Thanksgiving night of 2018. I only remember because after I finished my tasks for the day, I had to help set up Christmas decorations. I go to the one storage area we called the dungeon, which got its name due to being dimly lit and having a really musty odor, to grab a few wreaths. I spot the box containing the wreaths and grab two. As I'm walking out, I hear a whisper in my ear as clear as day, "Wrong one." I immediately jump back, because I was the only one around and had no idea who or what could have made that noise, but I just went back to the main floor to set up the wreaths. Turns out, the one wreath that I bought couldn't be used due to lack of ribbon, tinsel, and there being no holly or berries on it. Within an instant, I knew that the voice was trying to tell me that I was bringing up the wrong wreath, and I was shocked that I was being helped out. The following story takes place in the basement too, although it didn't happen to me. The story goes that an employee was walking down the hall of a basement and saw what looked like one of the maintenance workers in the basement, but this was well past the time their shift ended. She called out to him asking why he was still there, when she suddenly heard a crashing noise coming from a storage room next to her. She goes to see what caused the noise, and there's a hole in the door like someone punched through it. She goes back out to talk to the guy, but he was gone. The next story happened to this one employee who was doing a turn-down service in a room. For those of you unfamiliar, turn-down service is when your room is refreshed and you're given champagne and chocolate-covered strawberries. At least that's how we do it. However, we also add candles to the room and have a live flame to it, which I think is stupid as I see it as a fire hazard. But the hotel hasn't burned down yet. The guy was finishing lighting the final candle and double-checked to make sure he didn't forget anything, and found he forgot to get them new body towels. He goes and grabs them the new towels, and when he comes back into the room, all of the candles he lit were out. Not one, but 8 of them. He thought this was weird, so he lit them again and was on his way. But just like me, he was interested in the unexplainable. So he waited another 5 minutes before going back into the room, and sure enough the candles were out. He lit them again and left because he was sure the ghost was messing with him. 2 hours later, the guests that had the turn-down service called to complain about the candles in the room being out when they arrived. Go figure. This last story is a bit more wholesome. For the first 15 years the hotel was open, all of the groundskeeping was managed by the guy called Sam. From what I've heard, Sam loved his job, because as he saw it, he was the artist of the hotel, and helped add to its beauty because he would make sure everything was perfect. Grass was even, flower beds looked stunning. In the winter he made sure the parking lot was always clear of ice and snow. Sam really took pride in his work, but sadly passed of a heart attack 8 years ago on the grounds. It just hasn't been the same since. However, some groundskeepers still think he hasn't moved on and still roams the place. One groundskeeper said he remembers one day, as he finished putting new flowers in the front, he suddenly heard a whisper say, "Beautiful." He looked around and saw no one other than groundskeepers nearby, but not near enough for them to have said this. Apparently this kind of stuff happens more often than you'd imagine. Multiple groundskeepers have said any time they put in a large amount of effort into making the grounds look beautiful, they'll sometimes hear a voice of someone saying that they did a good job. They believe it's Sam checking up with the grounds, because if there was any place he'd want to be, it's there, because of how much he cared for the hotel grounds. Just as a fun factoid, the land on which the hotel was built used to be farmland for around 170 years, until it was bought up and converted into use of the hotel in and around the 1990s. As far as the unexplained stuff at the hotel goes, he says that he never noticed anything until around 3 months of the hotel being open. He said it would be little things at first, like something falling off a desk or table, besides knowing for a fact they weren't very close to the edge. The activity became more intense as the years went on, and he thinks of the first time someone reported hearing a voice being in 2000. An employee was getting supplies in the service room when all of a sudden they heard a voice say, "Leave." The guy looked around to see if he was being told to hurry up, but couldn't find anyone. Activity started to get violent in 2004 when it was first reported that the bed in a room that had just been made was essentially trashed. None of the sheets were ripped or anything, but they were scattered throughout the room along with the pillows. By this time, it wasn't uncommon for an employee to hear footsteps coming up the stairs from the basement, only for no one to be there or have the feeling of being watched in the basement. He said he can't remember the first time someone actually saw a ghost, but believes it would be around the same time as the bed incident. One thing that is interesting to note, though, is he has never once been told of any tactile experience. Now comes the darker information I was told in the entire hotel's run. There's only ever been one person that passed on the hotel's property, and it's possibly the reason for the woman in white. As some context, since the hotel property was converted farmland, there are woods next to the hotel because the developers decided to preserve nearby naturally beautiful for the hotel. In these woods there are trails to hike if the guests feel so inclined, and a pond people could swim in. However, in 2007, a woman who was staying at the hotel drowned in the pond, and ever since then, we do not tell guests that the pond is in the woods, and if the guests do find it on their own, there's now a sign saying no fishing, no swimming, no ice skating for liability purposes. My boss personally believes it's her spirit people see around the hotel, because no one else has perished on the property. However, that being said, he believes the other activity experienced by people could be due to workers who have perished on the farm due to work injuries and not moving on. In the room I had mentioned previously, where the lights came back on after I had turned them off, a medium stayed there one night because she was in town for one of her shows. She had requested to stay in a room that had reported paranormal experiences, so she was placed in that room. She stays for 2 nights, and when she's checking out, she told us what she experienced while staying there. Just as a warning, I wasn't present for what the medium said, but was relayed to me by my boss. The medium said that while in that room, she made contact with only one spirit, and it was of a 6-year-old boy. Now this is where it gets weird, but confirms that the spirit in that place is from when the land was still a farm. The boy would be mischievous and do little things around that room, like turn on lights and stuff, but then none of the spirits in the hotel are there to harm people. This is coming from a medium, so take that as you will. I personally believe she was telling the truth about the spirits not meaning us any harm, mainly because no one has ever been hurt, as they usually do not even make themselves known to guests. It's mostly our staff. My parents have owned a tavern/restaurant for 14 years in my small town. My father is someone who likes to start new projects and is a well-known person in our town. One day he was contracted by the local realtor to offer my father a private showing of a historical hotel that had been up for sale. This hotel had been around for decades and went from hotel to restaurant to bar with little success. Everyone who had owned it before put it back on the market within a year. The bank had the title now, and the realtor told my father, if you don't buy it and fix it up, they plan on ripping it down. A lot of people in the town thought the only person who could save it was my father, so he bought the hotel. My parents kept the downstairs bar and renovated the upstairs for apartments. That is when odd things started to happen. My father would come home almost every night with the camera footage to show my mum and I. The footage always showed an empty pool room with a random floating orb around in the foreground. My father is a believer in the paranormal, whereas my mother is not. So her and I both chalk it up to dust and bugs, although I will agree the way the orb zigzagged around the room was weird. It still seemed like nothing though. A month goes by and my father comes home early on a Saturday from working down at the hotel. He walked into the house, spooked, something my father rarely is, and he detailed about how he was behind the bar checking on receipts from the night before, when he heard footsteps approaching from the hallway entrance. We don't open on Sundays, but if someone my dad knew saw his truck in the parking lot, they would just walk in to see him. So he didn't find the footsteps odd at all. Without looking up from his receipts, he called out, "We aren't open, but give me a second." He heard the footsteps entering the bar room and take 6 more steps towards him before stopping. Taking another second to finish going over last night's shift, he looked up and peers around the woodish support beam, and there's no one there. He said he got out of there so fast, he doesn't even remember locking the door behind him. My mum obviously thinks he's crazy, but I'm freaked. That place had always given me the creeps, but my father confirming my fears made me never step foot in the building again. 2 days ago, my mum had an experience there that sent her out of the door faster than my dad. She was in the bar room before opening hours collecting the shift money from the night before. She wasn't in there for more than 5 minutes before she started to hear the faint sound of music coming from the entrance hallway. She said she ignored it for a while, assuming it was one of the tenants upstairs. After collecting the money, she went to leave and the music started getting louder. She said it sounded like old waltz music, piano-based, and it sounded clear as day. The further she walked down the hall towards the bathroom, the more prominent the noise became. As she stepped in front of the woman's restroom, she said it sounded like someone was in there playing music on their phone. By this time, my mum was sufficiently freaked out and ran out of rational reasoning behind what it could be. Just as she was about to open the door, she said she heard the water turn on and off twice before running out of the building. In the parking lot, she called my dad to come down, certain someone had been in there with her, but when he came down to check it out, no one was there. Now my mum is a believer, and we are both properly terrified of that old creepy hotel. I really hope there's nothing more to share with you about that. Oh, and as an update, the hotel burnt down a week ago. The cause is still undetermined. I spent a year studying in Mexico recently, and as you do on exchange, I tried to travel as much as I could. Between the semester, there is a big break, and me and my buddy that I spent the most time with during the exchange decided we'd go on a longer backpacking trip through Mexico together. We had a rough plan of where to go and what we wanted to see, but we hadn't even booked our flight back yet, nor were we sure from where we would take it from. We wanted to keep it flexible. We had an amazing time, and a few days before the trip ended, we finally decided we would take our flight from a city that was close and had really cheap flights. But the city itself didn't really have anything to offer. Then, on Airbnb, we found a room very close to the airport in a house with a pool, and we thought we would just treat ourselves to a relaxed pool day at the end of the trip. It turned out that the hosts were a family. The husband was Mexican, and the wife was from Europe, and could even speak our native language. So we arranged that we would take the bus to the airport, and they would pick us up from there. When we finally arrived at the city, it was already dark, and the bus driver refused to drive us to the airport, since it was not directly on his route, so he just dropped us off on the highway. That was already a pretty bad situation to be in from the beginning, standing with our backpacks at the side of the road in the middle of nowhere, in a not-so-safe city in Mexico. But I called the hosts and sent them our GPS location, and they said no problem and that they would come to us. The husband came to fetch us, and it was a very uncomfortable situation getting into the car with a stranger in the middle of the night in the middle of nowhere. It also didn't help that the guy looked like Danny Trejo without a mustache, and as I tried to make small talk with him, he only gave monosyllabic answers or straight out ignored me. Well, he's just not a big talker, I thought, and hoped that soon we would arrive. Looking back, I can see a million red flags, but for some reason at the time, we just didn't see them, or were too tired. But we didn't really have any other choice than going with him anyway. We arrived, and that should have immediately set off alarms. We were in the middle of nowhere. There were fields with sheep and goats all around us, and a gravel road off the paved road, and along that road there were about 6 huge mansions, all with 2-meter walls around them, topped with NATO fence, huge gates, and at least 2 gigantic guard dogs per house. We entered the house and were greeted by the wife, a bubbly middle-aged woman that was very talkative and pleasant. She had actually cooked dinner for us, and we ate while exchanging small talk. The husband just sat there without a single word. After dinner, we more or less went directly to bed because it had gotten late, and we were tired from a long day. The next morning, we saw that the weather was not too good, so we decided to go into town and just do the few touristy things the place had to offer, instead of spending time at the pool. When we came back, it was already dark, but we decided to jump into the pool anyway to cool off, as it was very hot and humid. The wife joined us at some point, and my friend made the mistake to ask how they were able to afford such a house, as it didn't really match the price range of jobs they were telling us that they were doing. And she deflected a bit and added that her husband was very handy because he had grown up in the streets and basically built the house himself. We realized that it maybe wasn't the best topic of conversation and broke it off quickly. That was the last day of our trip, and we had our flight back home early next morning. We thought we could have some weed that was left over, that we'd brought along with us on the trip, and it would be nice to smoke it out since it was our last night. But as this was a family home and they had kids around, we thought it would be better to speak to our hosts if they would mind. So later in the evening we asked the wife if it was okay if we smoked on the terrace, which for some reason she found quite amusing and started to laugh. She shouted to her husband, who was lying on the couch watching TV, "My love, the boys asked if it would be okay to smoke some weed. What do you think?" He laughed, but did not give an answer. We looked at her with a dumbfounded expression, and she told us, "Sure, just go ahead." So we went to the terrace and started smoking our joint. Later, they joined us and we had a chat. And this is where things got messed up. They started asking us for some reason where we got the weed, how much it was, who we got it from, and how much we would have to pay to get it back in Europe. They seemed way too interested in the weed, and at that point the wife just nonchalantly reveals to us, "Yes, we thought about doing that for a source of income selling weed, but too many people die doing that because the cartels don't like it. Actually, my husband used to kill people for doing that." I immediately felt sober. Did she just say? And as if he read my mind, her husband added, "Yes, when I was about 16, I took care of a lot of people for the cartel for money." He said it in a tone as if he just used to mow lawns when he was a teenager. I still thought I must have misunderstood. So I texted my friend who was sitting across the table from me, trying not to make eye contact because I knew we would just freak each other out. He confirmed that we had indeed understood right. We discussed what we should do, and he agreed that there's no immediate threat, and that we should just stay. We don't have anywhere else to go and it's already late. But then things got crazier. We tried to keep our composure and not completely freak out while still making conversation with our hosts. The husband, a few minutes later, got up and went inside to fetch something. He returned with a literal kilo of weed pressed into a brick. He proceeded to break bits off, roll them into a joint that would have probably knocked out Snoop Dogg. It was about the size of my thumb, and I guess it had about 2 grams of weed in there. Of course he offered it to us, but we politely declined, saying that we were already pretty stoned. He seemed a little offended, but fortunately bought our excuse. But it got worse. A few minutes later we heard a couple of loud bangs. The wife became a bit uneasy and asked, "What was that?" To which he answered calmly, 9mm. To confirm my suspicion that it had indeed been shots, I would say between 5 or 7, pretty quickly after one another. The wife's nerves didn't calm and she asked again, "What do you think they're shooting at? Cows? Air? People? Don't you think we should go inside?" But he shrugged it off, and we stayed outside. A few minutes later there were more shots, and this time even closer. The wife got even more upset and asked again, "Should we maybe go in? What do you think they're shooting at?" And I think I'll never forget when he answered in the calmest way imaginable, "No, it's okay. I didn't hear any screams yet." I don't know why, but the way he just calmly said that freaked me out, and is still making my heart beat whenever I think about it. After that, we quickly excused ourselves and went to our room, when we could finally talk, and basically both lost it and panicked. What the hell were we supposed to do? We were locked into a house with a Sicario in the middle of nowhere, and people are shooting outside. We decided it was probably our best bet to stay, because we thought, we're his guests, he's not gonna harm us, hopefully, and it's better to have walls, dogs, and him in between us and the people shooting around. So we basically barricaded ourselves in the room and didn't sleep a second until the morning, when we noped out of there and went to the airport. I was never so happy to be patted down at airport security in all my life. So a little backstory. My sister of 21 and I were road tripping to the west coast to move there, and we stopped at a hotel for one night to split up a 2-day drive in mid-June. We also brought along her super friendly but intimidating black Brittany/Pitbull mix pup. I should also mention I'm a 17-year-old feminine-looking guy and often get mistaken for a girl due to my figure. Now on to the story. We got to this hotel around 7 p.m, checked in, and got our room on the second floor. Everything was going great, but we were hungry from the trip. Since her back was hurting from the drive, I reluctantly went down about 2 blocks to get some sandwiches. The walk goes fine, there and back, and as soon as I'm back at the building, I'm hungry and ready to eat. Much to my dismay, my sister informs me that she forgot some things in her car and wants me to go fetch them. I take her key, run to the car. It only takes about 5 minutes and I'm back at the hotel again. Now, this hotel is one of those where the walkway to the rooms is an open balcony, for reference, and the elevator is only accessible with a key card. So I walk up to it, and as I do, I see these 2 men, seemingly about to get up to their car, or so I thought. One had his hand on the door, but upon seeing me they both head towards the elevator. I've heard enough of these stories to know where this situation is heading. I decide that if I walk away, that would just invite them to follow me, in a city I've never been to before. So I use my keycard and press the elevator button, and get in, and unsurprisingly they do too. Now what? I think to myself, and suddenly remember that my sister has pepper spray on her lanyard with her keys. I grasp it firmly in my hand and have my finger resting on the top, prepared to spray. Now thankfully our room is a turn to the right and then a straight shot from the elevator. I get off and try to let them get off first so they aren't behind me, but they insist I go first. So now I'm fast walking to our room, key card in one hand, pepper spray in the other, ready to slam the door when I get in. I open the door and these dudes are right behind me, about 5 inches away, probably ready to grab. I open the door and say, "Hey, I have this stuff from the car," making sure they heard me loud and clear, and pushing past the dog into the room. I close it, and then they see me looking at my sister, who's on her bed facing the door. They walk past our room to the right, where there is only one other room. I give my sister a look like, "You won't believe these creeps," and lock the door behind me. I think had they not seen my sister and her dog, they most likely would have followed me into the room and done who knows what. My sister also says she saw them walk past our window and look in because our blinds weren't closed all the way. We think we heard them talking to a woman in the hall and heard them say goodbye, so they probably aren't even staying here. Creepy dudes. Let's not meet again. About 15 years ago, when I was 13 to 14, I went on a road trip with my best friend's family. It was the 2 parents, her brother, around 15 to 16 years old, and the 2 of us girls. One of the hotels had a courtyard with a pool. We went swimming, all of us, and there were a few other people swimming and hanging around the pool, mostly kids swimming and adults on chairs. There was one guy in his 50s. It looked like who was just sitting there not interacting with anyone. Sunglasses on so we couldn't see where he was looking, and we all assumed he was with a family there. The next day, my friend's parents went on a date and left the 3 of us kids in the hotel room. We were good and weren't inclined to do anything dumb like wander off, so they weren't too worried. We had a window overlooking the pool, and I looked out, and there was that guy again watching the pool, where some young women were swimming. Later I looked out again and he was still out there watching, but a different family with young kids. It wasn't sunny out, so he wasn't sunbathing, and he didn't have a book or anything. He was just staring, which made me very unsettled. The next evening we all went out to dinner. When we got back, it was dark. This guy was in the parking lot, sunglasses still on, checking the license plates of every car. He checked our license plates as we were walking away from the car. My friend's dad, an imposing army guy, very protective of his family and car, confronted him about it, and the guy said he was a parking lot attendant. We went to the lobby and asked them to clarify what was up with their attendant, and I'll never forget the girl behind the desk saying, "We don't have a parking lot attendant." We left the next day. When I was younger, my family used to take vacations, being that my cousins and I were a similar age. This happened in 2008 when we went to Universal Studios in Orlando. I am the youngest of 9 cousins, including all my sisters, all of whom are girls, except me. As I said, our ages were close and only ranged from myself at 10 to my eldest cousin at 15. At this age in my life, I remember being particularly paranoid, whether it had been a scary movie or two, learning about things in school/news, so let's just say my perspective and reactions may have been skewed by this. So my big Italian family was staying at the Hard Rock, wherein there are restaurants, bars, pools and shops. This one night, the parent, probably half in the bag, gave us money to go to the ice cream parlor within the resort. "Stay together," they said. I immediately knew the moment I saw him. I still remember his face to this day. He was the spitting image from The Killer in Disturbia, and this ticked me off from the get-go. I remember being online with my cousin, hanging on the end, and I was locked onto this guy. I may be the youngest, but I also hold a responsibility being the only boy. I saw him make an inaudible comment to one of my cousins before ordering his ice cream. Keep in mind this place is packed, a lot going on, kids running around, maps open, distractions everywhere, but my eyes are locked. Next I see him clearly lean back and a little over to take a look at 2 of my cousin's legs. We're talking 13-year-old girls here. And as I mentioned, the place is packed, the line is long, and people are shoulder to shoulder, and that's when things got crazy. As he was paying with his left hand, his right was sort of hovering over my cousin's butt, but barely touching. With everything going on, they didn't notice a thing. I turned to my sister and told her what was up. 2 heads is better than 1, plus I wanted to make sure I wasn't just seeing things. Her face immediately turned grotesque when he saw what I was talking about. 2 of my cousins having already ordered ice cream, my sister told us that she was getting a call. Talking 15-year-old pre-smartphone era, only for emergency flip phones, so it would really only be our parents, and that we needed to get out the line. Good quick thinking on her part. The 2 who ordered being understandably furious, my cousin sadly walks past all the eager ice cream customers. When I asked my cousin what the man said to her, she said he asked if we were together. For a minute there, and sometimes even to this day, I ponder whether or not I made a scene over nothing. Perhaps only because he resembled someone bad in a movie. But his cold, long hard stare at me as I departed the plaza with my cousins, safe, will always chill me to the bone. I work in a hotel, so I'm sitting at the desk and a guy comes down to buy a drink from our market. I do the polite chit-chat while he pays, like good morning, how are you, but he just stares at me and figure maybe it's too early in the morning for him and move on with my day. 10 minutes later, I look up towards our breakfast area and notice this same guy sitting in a chair facing me and intently staring at me. When I meet his gaze, he looks away and I think, okay, maybe he's just zoned out. I keep going with my end of the shift stuff and look up again a few minutes later to see him still staring at me. At this point, I needed to count the drawer anyway, so I scoop my chair over to the drawer that also conveniently happens to be in a spot where he wouldn't be able to see me and start counting. I then look up and notice him staring, but now he's switching seats. He moved into a higher stool that has a direct view of me at the desk, no matter where I go. He isn't even trying to hide or disguise the fact he's staring. While it isn't all bad, or even as bad as some other things I've had to deal with in the past, it's certainly unsettling and really freaked me out. I made it home a while after. When I left the hotel, I sped walked to my car and got in as quickly as I could. When I drove past the door, he was standing by it, just watching me. I just hit the gas and took a different route home. I checked behind me frequently to make sure I wasn't being followed. But to anyone who has never experienced this, let me tell you that it is profoundly uncomfortable and leaves you with a lasting sense of dread. My shifts are from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. This particular weekend, we had a whole wedding party staying at the hotel. The night of the wedding was a Saturday, and that's when this whole thing happened. Before my shift started, most of the drunk wedding guests had already retired to their rooms for the night. I saw a few of them as the previous shift was leaving, and they all seemed very friendly and happy. Once I was all alone for the night, I settled in behind the desk to begin my 8 long hours of work. Then the hotel phone rings. I picked it up, and in my best customer service voice said, "Good evening, this is the Strand Hotel." A man began speaking, but I couldn't understand him. It sounded like he was underwater, like the connection was bad. When I could decipher what he was saying, this was our conversation. "I need 10 towels delivered to room 401. "Okay, I can do that for you. It should only take me a few minutes." "My girlfriend isn't here." I was silent because I have absolutely no idea what to say to that. "I want to have some fun with you, baby." Now I'm freaking out. And then he hangs up. I tried multiple times to call my manager, but she never answered. I ended up locking myself in the bathroom and calling my mum. She calmed me down, and I went back behind the desk. I was still super jittery, so when I heard the elevator start to come down, I'll admit, I hid. I crouched behind some boxes and covered my mouth. I heard footsteps, but I couldn't tell where they were coming from or going towards the kitchen area. I stayed back there for about 5 minutes, and when I was about to come out, I heard a man cough. I froze. I heard his footsteps going back to the elevator, and I stayed hidden until he was gone. Now, I obviously don't know for sure that the man who called me was him. But would someone come down the elevator in the middle of the night, stand around silently for 5 minutes and then leave? And here's the detail that freaked me out the most. The hotel room 401 that he wanted me to bring 10 towels to, it was unoccupied that night. I'm an 18-year-old female, and just started a job at a hotel a little over a month ago as a housekeeper. The hotel is located in very rural Midwest. Not a super busy hotel except for the occasional family reunions checking in and a few workers passing through the state. Many of the people who come through are older, 40s and 50s, and when I started, my parents had told me to be careful because the hotel was sketchy. I never really found it to be sketchy or the people passing through to be, until a few weeks ago. I had clocked in around 10:30 and headed down to the end of the hall opposite of where the lobby was to start on my stayovers, the rooms where people stayed more than one night. At the end of the hall there were 4 rooms tucked into almost a corner. You can't really see the doors to these rooms until you reach the end of the hallway. There's 2 rooms on one side, 2 on the other, and I was grabbing all the supplies I needed to do the stayover when a man came out of one of the 4 rooms and asked how to work the coffee machine. He was about 3 times the size of me, 6'3", 300 pounds, where I'm 5'3" and 125. Didn't seem like a big deal or weird. I'm pretty friendly and outgoing and can make little small talk. I went back to cleaning the other room and minding my business when he comes out to tell me again his room didn't need attending to. I figured I was glad that it was another room I could check off my list. My manager had come down the hall to strip a room that had checked out, and I turned down the hall to go strip another room when the man came out of his room again. I assumed he had another question about something in the room, so I turned around to speak to him. He asked, "Aren't you scared to do your job?" "Not really, since I rarely have any interaction with guests as a housekeeper," I say. He then went on to say that I was awfully pretty and needed mace or a weapon to protect myself, and I showed him my car keys that I kept in my pocket for that exact reason. The conversation wasn't really off-putting, but when I realized what he was getting at, my body flooded with anxiety. He then said, "I don't think car keys are enough. You're small and could get easily snatched up." And in that moment, I went into the room my manager was in across the hall and waited for him to go back into his room before carrying on with my job as normally as possible. That experience really shook me up, and I sat in another room down the hall for a half-hour crying and having an anxiety attack, because I thought this man would try and find me in whichever room I was in and take me. To the man who stayed in room 131, let's not meet. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's stories. As always, a huge thanks to my incredible patrons whose names are on screen. For a very small amount of money every month, you can help support the channel. Obviously, it means a lot. Link in the description. And you also get some cool rewards for doing so. So think about it and maybe check it out. In any case, if there's something scary that's ever happened to you that you would like to share, feel free to send it to my Reddit or my inbox. All the information is in the description. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.